if you got names like that, you know, you just, after a few years, you just
I wouldn't know what I wouldn't know how you felt.
Derek gets called Derek every day. Every day of his life he gets called Derek. You gave up a long time ago?
Long time ago.
Derek, D-U-R. Anyway, Robert is the senior pastor of the First Baptist Church Dallas, and he's frequently on Fox News Channel as a contributor on various shows, and he is a friend and a man of God, and he speaks boldly, and he is also a counselor to the president. Amen. And knows him and the vice president very well. So it's good to have a voice like Robert's, at least giving advice. They don't always listen to him necessarily, but he's there to give advice and to counsel, and we need to pray for him in that role. Amen. Amen. So welcome, Dr. Robert Jeffers.
Thanks so much, Tim. And, we really appreciate our partnership with AFR at Pathway to Victory. I was telling Tim and Bert last night, we've always gotten great response, but it seems like the last year, I mean, it's just gone through the roof. And I think that's a testimony not to what we're doing, but what you all are doing in expanding the outreach of AFR. So thank you for what you do in making it possible for broadcasters like us to have a platform. Now, I've written a new book that I'm here to talk about today, A Place Called Heaven, 10 Surprising Truths About Your Eternal Home. And you might be asking, you know, with the possibility of nuclear conflict with North Korea, a nuclear hurricane on the way to Florida, a political chaos in Washington, D.C., why in the world should we be thinking about heaven right now? Well, that's precisely the answer. Because regardless of what's going on in the world in general, regardless of the chaos you're experiencing in your own private world, the hope is God has something better planned for us. The Bible never diminishes the reality of the suffering we experience. God just adds one word to it: temporary. Whatever you're experiencing right now won't last forever. So I think this is a great time for a hope-filled book called A Place Called Heaven. Amen. But you know, I wrote it not only to be inspirational, but also to be informational. I mean, just imagine Tim called you in and said, I've got some news for you. We're going to open a new branch, a bureau for AFR in London, England, and you're moving there in 6 months. And not only that, the move is going to be a permanent move. How would you react? I mean, besides resigning, let's already put that on the table. That wasn't an option. Well, probably if you were smart, you'd certainly do the best job you could the next 6 months here, but you'd be thinking about that move that was coming. You'd want to find out everything you could about life in England. You would want to make the necessary preparations, securing a home, making sure your kids were taken care of. You'd prepare for that impending trip. Well, the fact is we're all going to be taking a trip, if we're Christians, to a new location called heaven. It only makes sense that we would spend some of our time right now preparing for that future journey. And what I've done in the book is answer the 10 most frequently asked questions people have about heaven. Will we know one another in heaven? Do people in heaven know what's happening on earth? Will heaven be the same for everybody? One thing people want to know is, what are we going to do in heaven? You know, one reason people aren't excited about heaven, they're scared to death they're going to be bored. They think heaven is going to be one, let's go ahead and say it, they think heaven's going to be nothing but one long, unending church service. And to most Christians, that sounds more like hell. But okay, let's just be honest about it. Well, we are going to worship in heaven, but we're going to do a lot more than worship. We're going to work, and I talk about that in the book. But in closing today, what I want to talk about for you all is something very practical, and that is, why should we be thinking about heaven right now? What are the benefits of thinking about heaven? Well, first of all, being heavenly minded reminds us of the brevity of life here on earth. We need that reminder. You know, Moses said in Psalm 90, Lord, teach us to number our days and remember how very few they are. Help us to spend them as we should. Thinking about heaven reminds us of that. You know, Bruce Wilkinson says, if you want to think about heaven, take out a sheet of paper, put a dot right in the middle of the paper, and then draw a line from the dot all the way to the edge of the page, and imagine that line extending to infinity. The dot represents the 70 or 80 years you have here on earth. The line represents eternity. Most of us spend all of our time thinking about that little dot, those 70 or 80 years, and never thinking about the line. Thinking about heaven focuses us on the line instead of just the dot. That's one benefit. Secondly, focusing on heaven prepares us for God's judgment of our lives. You know, Christians have this idea of, oh, I'm saved, I don't have to worry about God's judgment. False. 2 Corinthians 5:10 says, we, talking about Christians, must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one of us may be rewarded for what we've done in the body, whether it be good or evil. The judgment we face isn't the same judgment as non-Christians. We don't have to worry about God's condemnation of our lives, but we are going to face God's evaluation of our lives. And here is the interesting thing. As short as our time is here on earth, what we do in these fleeting years determines the kind of heaven we're going to experience. As I say in the book, what we do on earth reverberates in the halls of heaven forever. And can I say a word to you? Look, I know you're here at AFR, not necessarily because it's the highest paying position that you could get anywhere. Every one of you in this room could probably be earning more money someplace else. You're here because of a commitment. You're here because you want to make an eternal difference. And you've chosen to partner with an organization that is making an eternal difference. God sees what you're doing. He sees your effort. He sees the sacrifices you're making to make here, and they are going to be rewarded one day. Focusing on heaven helps us realize that and remember that. And finally, focusing on heaven puts our present suffering in perspective. You know, in 2 Corinthians 4, Paul said, for our light, momentary afflictions are nothing compared to the eternal weight of glory. And you think, well, what do you mean, Paul? Light afflictions? You don't know what I'm going through. They're not light. Well, think about what Paul went through. He was beaten within an inch of his life 3 times. He was shipwrecked. He was stoned. He said, yet, compared to what awaits me, these afflictions are light. You know, think about a 1-ton brick, a 1-ton concrete block. Is that heavy or light? What? Compared to what? Compared to a feather, that concrete block is heavy. Compared to a 120-story skyscraper, it's light. It's the same thing with our suffering. Is our suffering heavy or light? Depends what you compare it to. Compared to the great things God has for us, it is very light what we're suffering out. And not only that, Paul said it's momentary. Wait a minute, Paul, you don't understand. This has been going on in my life for years, the physical affliction, this emotional pain I've been going through. He said, but compared to eternity, it's very, very short. Somebody said, from the perspective of heaven, our worst suffering on earth one day will be seen to be nothing more than a one-night stay in a bad motel. That's what thinking about heaven does for us. It puts whatever we're going through in perspective. I close with these words from C.S. Lewis. Have you ever heard people say, oh, people are so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good? I've never met one person like that. I've never met one person who thinks about heaven too much. Lewis said, our problem is not that we think about heaven too much, it's that we think about it too little. He said, search history and you'll discover that the people who made the greatest difference in this world are precisely those who thought most about the next world. And then his famous line, aim at heaven and you get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you get neither. I want to thank you for helping me as we partner together to help people think about and prepare for that place called heaven. Let's bow together in prayer. Can we?